For this video, we're going to take another approach to adding trim. Instead of cutting it into the pattern, we're going to create additional pattern pieces and sew it onto the existing pattern. To do that, I will demonstrate on the sleeve. First thing we need to do is get the length of the line that we need. So if you highlight a line, and I am in the Edit Pattern tool, if you highlight a line, notice you'll get a 2-line length over here in the Property Editor. So I'm going to go ahead and take that amount, so I'm going to add a rectangle with a width of 9.6 and a height of 0.5. And I'm going to do a number of things here. I'm going to change the particle distance to 5. I'm going to add some additional thickness. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew it to the sleeve. And then in the 3D window, I'm going to hit Q to select the pattern piece. I'm going to click right on the pattern piece and I'm going to superimpose side. And what that does is it moves the pattern piece into place so that when you go to simulate, it will be where it needs to be. So now I'm going to simulate, and notice now that the piece is not sewn together, so I'm just going to do a quick segment sewing. And now we have that ribbing, that trim added in. I'm going to view thick by hitting Alt 1. And then I'm going to go back, and the nice thing is all I have to do is create a symmetric pattern with sewing over here on this side. What I'm going to actually do is line it up next to the existing piece for when we go to texture. And there, if you notice, it put it in the right place, and now we can simulate. And that's another way to add trimming onto a pattern piece. I'm going to stop now and do the same for the bottom, but then I'll come back and show you how to do the trimming on the collar, which is just slightly more tricky. Okay, I'm going to do a quick save here as a new project. We're going to call this Collarless Casual Shirt V2. Now we're going to create ribbing, a flat pattern piece for the collar. To do this, we need to get the entire length of the collar plus these individual pieces. So to do this, I'm going to need to move one of these out of the way. It's sometimes hard to get to do free sewing when they're close together. And I need to get the entire length of all these segment pieces. So there's a little quirk that when you have a pattern that is symmetrical, you can't get the symmetrical line length. For example, here on the waistline, I do get the symmetric line length for both of these, but when I do that here, I don't get that. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove linked editing. I'm going to remove linked editing on these two pieces so I can get the entire length of all these segments together. So the entire length is 19.875. So I'm going to create a pattern piece that's 19.875, 0.5 inches high. And now I've got to fit that over the collar. So before I do that, I'm going to change my particle distance to 5 and do some additional thickness of 2. And now using the free sewing tool, I'm going to sew this trim Now using the free sewing tool, I'm going to sew that single trim piece to all the different pattern pieces that make up the collar. And of course, the important thing is to do them in the right order. When you finish your free sewing, it's going to look a little wild, so hang on. I'm going to superimpose side. And if you did all your sewing lines correctly, that piece should end up on top of the collar correctly. And if you notice, because there is a slight variation between this lower line length and the upper line length, the collar is not completely flat. So there's two things here. If by chance you want to show a fabric that's been washed a number of times with some shrinkage problems, you could leave it the way it is. Or what you can do is, if you do want to show a flat collar that's new, you can go into the top line and you can add some elastic so that it'll flatten out. And I am going to set this from experience to 90, and then I'm going to simulate, and that will help flatten out the collar. And there's one other trick you can do as well, which is seam taping on that top segment, and that will help flatten out that collar. You can go ahead and do the seams in the same way. The armhole is especially difficult, or you can go back to the previous video and add the seams the way we did there. Thanks for watching, and I hope this alternative version of adding trim gives you ideas how to expand your patterns.